Edutainment. We got Professor Damon Fordham here, and he's a close friend, number one. He's also a historian. He has many books, and so I want you all to just pay attention to this young man because he's been doing this work for years. I've been knowing him about 40 years, I know.
25.
25, okay.
I'm trying not to claim something going on there.
But anyway, without any further ado, I would like to introduce to you Professor Damon Fordham. Let's go.
So some of you know that as old freedom over me, and before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. Now, that song speaks for itself. It requires nothing in the way of explanation or analysis. It's pretty straightforward. Side note, if any of y'all want to record this, go right ahead, because y'all gonna hear some things today that you're not likely to hear anywhere else, and you definitely want to share with other people in the future, okay? Now, over the past 3 summers, I've been spending time in places like Gambia and Senegal and Togo in West Africa. In fact, I'm going to Ghana in November. And there are some things that a lot of people don't know about this connection, which goes as follows. You see, from 700 to 1591 AD, you had 3 great empires in West Africa. The Ghana Empire, from 700 to 700 AD up until around 1300 or so, 1235. You had the Mali Empire from 1235 AD up to 1492, and the final was the Songhai from 1492 up until 1591. The last one was run by a man by the name of King Askia Muhammad, who had as much territory from modern-day Senegal to the upper part of the modern-day Congo. And so he was a Muslim king who had, because of the trade that he had with the Arabic kingdoms, had a great network not only of trade, but schools, such as the University of Sankore, which is in Genève, and the great schools of Timbuktu, which incidentally, their buildings are still in Mali today. So if they were so great, what happened? Well, here's the answer. In the words of Sir Isaac Newton, it's true of every great empire from history, from Babylon, Greece, Rome, the British Empire, the Soviet Union, and pretty soon, what goes up goes down. And so this King Askia had these 3 greedy sons who plotted against him, and when their father went blind in 1528, they basically exiled him, and they fought over the kingdom for the next 30 years. Meanwhile, up in Morocco, there was the Sultan Al-Mansur, who saw that the Songhai people had something that he didn't have, which was gold. But he had something they didn't have, which was guns. So it doesn't take a genius to figure out what happened next. So as all this was happening, 1502, Christopher Columbus, on his 3rd voyage to the Western Hemisphere, he brought with him to what we now call the Dominican Republic a Spanish priest named Padre Bartolomé de Casas. And Father Bartolomé was horrified at Columbus's enslavement of the natives of the region. And he said, this is a sin against God. Something must be done to alleviate the suffering of these people. His solution, go to Africa and use the blacks instead. And in 1527, excuse me, in his Historia de las Indias, he begged God to forgive him for what he had wrought upon the African people. Now, I was at Goreaba, off the coast of Senegal, West Africa, over the last couple of summers. And this is where they have les mentions des esclaves. Any y'all parlez-vous de français? Okay. Excuse me? All right, so what does mention des esclaves mean? House of slaves. And so I went there, and they have about 3 or 4 stories of dungeons in which they would take people from points adjacent, and they would keep the men, women, and children in separate cells. They have where they have the objects of torture that they would use to keep them in subjugation, as well as portraits of Nelson Mandela, Michael Jackson, Presidents George Bush Jr., Clinton and Obama, as well as several of the popes, the dignitaries who have been there. And then there is the door of no return, which they march you through, that had the plank that would lead them to the slave ships. I was there with a young lady named Phyllis Holmes, who was from right here in Charleston. She was my seatmate on the plane. And I said, Phyllis, how do you feel now that you've seen this? And her words to me were as follows. All my life I wondered what my ancestors saw, what they felt, what they heard when they were marched onto these ships. Now that I have walked where they have walked and seen what they have seen, I feel closure and I feel whole. And I said, heck, Phyllis, I couldn't have said it any better myself. So here's how this plays out locally. In 1526, King Ferdinand of Spain sent an explorer named Captain Juan Lucas Vasquez de Ayllon who came to what we now know as Georgetown, South Carolina, which is 50 miles to the coast north of us. And he named the area as the colony of San Miguel Guadalupe. And he brought with him about 500 Spaniards and 100 Africans, brought in to work in slavery. And Captain Vasquez died early in the voyage, and he left behind a dictatorial administrator named Jimenez Doncel. And Jimenez Doncel was so evil that one night the Africans surrounded his hut and set it on fire with the desired results. And they ran into the nearby woods where they married into the Waccamaw tribe of Native Americans, and their descendants today are among the black people of Georgetown, South Carolina today. So the surviving Spaniards went back to Spain. Incidentally, that's the first known slave rebellion in America, I should add. So the surviving Spaniards went back to Spain and filed a report with King Ferdinand, which can today be read in a book called Yes, Lord, I Know the Road by J. Brett Morris, which is the source for that part of our story today. So, 150 years later, King Charles II of England colonized this area. And being the humble, modest, and unassuming guy that he was, he names it Charlestown. So the next year, real humble guy you see. So the next year, Captain Nathaniel sailed from England on a ship called the Three Brothers. And on the way here, he stopped in Barbados, where he purchased a family of 3 Africans, who he gave the English names of John, John Jr., and Elizabeth. Okay? Needless to say, we don't know their African names. So they brought them here to these coasts in the summer of 1670, and that is the foundation of slavery in the Charleston area. But there was another aspect of this too. Now, some of you might know that as Michael Rowed the Boat Ashore. What you probably don't know is that that song has its origins here in Charleston in 1867. A musicologist named Charles Ware came down here to be a co-author of a book called Slave Songs of the United States, and he heard local black people singing that and put that in the book. Now, many years later, there was a great lady who I'm sure Carlie knew back in the day by the name of Miss Septima Poinsett Clark. Okay, I saw her twice when I was a teenager. She was fired from her elementary school teaching position in 1955 because of her civil rights activities. So, she went to Mont Eagle, Tennessee, where she taught illiterate black adults how to read and write, and registered to vote to take charge of their lives. In 1959, some white college kids from the coffee houses of Greenwich Village in New York and the University of Berkeley in California, where I lectured in 2013. And the white kids were all arrested with Miss Clark for this activity. Miss Clark was put in a separate cell from the white kids for obvious reasons. But, however, she sang Michael Row the Boat Ashore to ease her mind while she was at this. And the white kids never heard anything like that before. So when they went back to the coffee houses of Greenwich Village and the University of Berkeley, they took that song with them. And this is where you get white folk singers like Pete Seeger, Peter, Paul and Mary, Joni Mitchell, Joan Baez, and Bob Dylan. If those of you familiar with Bob Dylan can imagine him getting up there and going, Michael Row the Boat Ashore, hallelujah. This is where they got that from, and that's what spread the song around the world. But Miss Clark came back to South Carolina, and in 1981 sued the state of South Carolina for the lost years of back pay and won before she died in 1987. So that song, along with the Sweetgrass Baskets, the foodways, folkways, and culture, and the dialect of everything around here with the black community, this is where we get the Gullah Geechee culture. And so that comes, one of the names of that comes from the Gullah people of Sierra Leone and Liberia in West Africa, just to name one of the many tribal groups out there, who had a long history of growing and cultivating rice. And they needed people here who knew how to do that. So from the plantations, from Georgetown, South Carolina to Brunswick, Georgia to the south of us, you had these rice plantations, and they brought these people to work there in slavery. But because the islands were so isolated, they kept more of the African speech, folkways, culture, and dialect than any other black people brought to these United States. And this is the foundation of the Gullah Geechee culture. My grandmother, Janie Fordham, was born in around 1900, Awendaw, South Carolina. And because she had to work in the fields as a little girl, she never had the opportunity to learn to read and write and go to school. So in 1968, when I was 4 years old, she would call me in the house by going, "Hey man, y'all churn too trifling, y'all better come on and y'all like books y'all," and things like that.
Boy, I know you can talk like that. Wow.
So, she and my grandfather saved their money so that my dad could go to South Carolina State, which is our major black college. But Dad was the first of 3 generations of teacher in our family. I am the second, and my nephew, Quadro Campbell, is the third. But in those days, now here's the important thing. In those days, if you were the son or daughter of a teacher or a black person with considerable education in this area, your parents did not want you speaking Gullah, because back then, people looked down on it as something of shame, that it was backward and country. Many will not admit that now, but that's the truth. So, but see, as you could tell, I always had a love of theatrics. So every now and then, I would make Dad furious by going, "Daddy, I'm hungry, I just want some okra soup." "Stop that, I didn't send you to school to talk like that." "How wrong, Daddy, I just want something to eat." "Stop it, quit looking at grandmother, stop it, I say." But in 1932, Dr. Lorenzo Dow Turner, a black linguist from Fisk University in Nashville, Tennessee, came to teach at South Carolina State, and he was shocked when the students here asked him questions like, they would say things like, "Man, Dr. Turner, hot up in here, man, out the window." "Excuse me?" Man, Dr. Turner, hot up and ya up to Brenda? Why, what type of speech is this? I find this fascinating. This I must study. So he went throughout coastal South Carolina and Georgia studying Gullah, and in Darien, he met a lady by the name of Amelia Dolly, who was singing one day and went, Awaka yilena yile 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 iwaka. Madam, what is that you are singing? Oh, my great-grandma used to sing that when I was a little gal. Your great-grandmother used to sing that when you were a little girl. Madam, I must ask you this. Did your great-grandmother come directly off the boat from Africa? Yeah, how you didn't know that? Why, Eureka, that's the funeral song of the Mende tribe of Sierra Leone. This Gullah is not the ignorant, backward country junk that people think it is. It's the cultural connection between the blacks of Africa and those of America. So, in 1949, he wrote Africanisms in the Gullah dialect. And in the 1990s, the granddaughter of Amelia Dolly, Mary Moran, who I had the honor of meeting before she died when she was 100 years old, she had the opportunity to go back to Sierra Leone and sing the song to people of the Mendes who knew the song, and they made a documentary of it called The Language I Cry In, and that's the story of Gullah. So, and I got a couple more. And I would be remiss if I not tell two more while I'm here. One is about my favorite period in American history, which is called the Reconstruction era, that is not widely known enough. And the reason I like to talk about it is because, see, I like to talk about things that most people don't already know. And the story of Reconstruction was censored from our history books for reasons I'm going to get into for 150 years. That was the period from 1865 to 1877, when after the fall of the Confederacy and the end of slavery, the federal government tried to reform the South by passing 3 constitutional amendments. The 13th in 1865, which ended slavery. The 14th in 1868, that said all persons born here were citizens. The 15th in 1870, that said all men born here had the right to vote. Women didn't get that till 1920. So with all this meant that African American men were electing their own representatives. In Louisiana, in 1872, came the first African American governor. His name was Pinckney Benton Stewart Pinchback. And he was put in to serve out the term of a corrupt governor named Henry Warmoth, who was impeached for corruption. And after Pinchback served his term, he did so well that he ran for the U.S. Senate of Louisiana and won. But the U.S. Senate refused to seat him. Gee, I wonder why. So he appealed to the Democratic Party, to no avail. He appealed to the Republican Party, to no avail. So according to the Congressional Record of 1873, pages 432, 433, Pinckney Benton Stewart Pinchback of Louisiana got on that U.S. Senate floor and said, I am a man, and I am an American citizen, with all of the rights and the privileges that are due to a man and an American citizen. But I say to you that from this day forward, I shall not follow the dictates of the Democratic Party. I shall not follow the dictates of the Republican Party. This day forward, I shall only follow the dictates of my heart and of my conscience. That's Pinckney Benton Stewart Pinchback of the great state of Louisiana. There you go. So, here in South Carolina, from 1870 to 1877, there were 2 black lieutenant governors. Alonzo Jacob Ransier from 1870 to 1872. Richard Howell Gleaves from 1872 to 1877. And Richard Howell Gleaves was lieutenant governor under Governor Franklin Jacob Moses. First time in American history that a black lieutenant governor and a Jewish governor ran a state. So in 1868, 76 blacks and 48 whites gathered here in Charleston to rewrite the Constitution of South Carolina in the most progressive document in American history, called the Declaration of Rights. This called for, and one of the people who wrote that, incidentally, is a really great person I'm going to tell you about in a minute. But this called for all laws pertaining to racial discrimination be stricken from the books. Women would be allowed to divorce abusive husbands. There would be state hospitals and mental institutions. No one would go to jail for debt. And on January 23rd, 1868, the great Robert Smalls, who in this harbor sneaked himself and his family aboard a Confederate ship called the Planter and sailed them off into freedom. He got up in there and declared, resolved, all children in South Carolina between the ages of 7 and 14 must attend public school at least 6 months a year under penalty of non-compliance. That, ladies and gentlemen, was the first public school law ever passed this far south of the Mason-Dixon line. Now, when I tell people these things, they ask me two questions. Number one, why haven't I heard any of this before? And number two, well, what the heck happened? I'll explain them both. Throughout the history of the Deep South, the deepest fear of the wealthy class of whites was that the poor whites, in their poverty and illiteracy, would find common cause with their black brethren and come together and create a revolution that would overthrow the rule of the wealthy class of whites. So, to prevent that from happening, those wealthy whites indoctrinated the poor whites into the idea that if black people had equality with them, the poor whites would be pushed to the bottom of society. In simple terms, ladies and gentlemen, divide and conquer of the poor so that the rich could stay rich. And that's what racism is all about, Charlie Brown. So, on December 24th, 1865, at the courthouse in Pulaski, Tennessee, 6 Confederate veterans gathered to form the Resistance Army Against Reconstruction. They named themselves after the Greek word for circle, which is kuklos, and the Scottish word for family, which is clan. That's how the Ku Klux Klan started. So for the next 12 years, the Southland bathed in blood as blacks and whites battled it out in the streets. Memphis Massacre of 1866, New Orleans Massacre of 1866, Meridian, Mississippi Massacre of 1871, Colfax, Louisiana Massacre of 1873, Clinton, Mississippi Massacre of 1875, Hamburg, South Carolina Massacre of 1876, Elton, South Carolina Massacre of 1876, and on November the 8th, 1876, on Broad Street here in Charleston, blacks and whites shot it out in the middle of the street. The federal government said, yo, this is too much. We can't have this mess going on here. We got to put a stop to this mess. And they passed the Tilden-Hayes Compromise of 1876 that ended Reconstruction. So, one of the byproducts of that was Mildred Rutherford of Georgia, of the United Daughters of the Confederacy. They went on a national crusade to censor things like that out of the history books used in classrooms and put in Confederate history. In 1978, when I was in the 8th grade, Moultrie Middle School in Mount Pleasant, the South Carolina history book by Mary Sims Oliphant said that after slavery, the Negroes lost their minds and the Ku Klux Klan was formed to bring order back to the South. But fortunately, I was an unathletic bookworm and a weirdo when I was a kid. So I was reading Langston Hughes' Pictorial History of the Negro in America, William Loren Katz's Eyewitness, the Negro in American History, let's see, along with the Ebony Encyclopedia of Black History. So I was vaccinated with the facts to make me immune to the nonsense. It's like I always tell my students, fight the foolishness with the facts. So, 1890, the governor of Mississippi, James K. Fordham, called the Mississippi legislature together to throw out the Progressive Reconstruction Constitution, replace it with the Segregation Constitution. Here in South Carolina, September 10th, 1896, Senator Benjamin Ryan Tillman, who 2 months earlier sent a black man named John Peterson to a lynch mob in Denmark, South Carolina, he called the state legislature to do the same thing. But, as described in my current book, The 1895 Segregation Fight in South Carolina, 6 brave black leaders, Robert Smalls, what? Oh, okay.
I'm talking to her. Keep on, carry on.
Robert Smalls, Robert Smalls, who we just discussed earlier, William J. Whipper, a black lawyer from Charleston, Thomas Miller, the founder of our black university, South Carolina State, James Wigg and Isaiah Reed, 2 black lawyers from Beaufort, and Robert Anderson, a black teacher from Georgetown. These 6 brave black leaders went to the State House, argued eloquently against the segregation constitution in the face of curses and threats. They lost 116-7 in the legislature, December 4th, 1895, but that loss led the next generation of black leaders in South Carolina to fight diligently to overturn those laws, In the short term, they lost the battle, but in the long term, they won the war. And that's important because, that's all important because, as the great Spanish philosopher Jorge Santillana said in 1905, those who don't remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Oh, I got one more for you. Now, also here in Charleston, you had the Denmark Vesey slave rebellion. Denmark Vesey was born in St. Thomas, Virgin Islands in 1767, and he was owned by a Charlestonian named Captain Joseph Vesey. And Captain Vesey needed somebody to do the paperwork for the plantation. So he taught Denmark how to read and lived to regret it, because Denmark read other things. He read Exodus 21:16, which said, "He that stealeth a man and selleth him shall be put to death." And Revelation 13:10, which said, "He that leadeth into captivity shall be led into captivity." And he also read about the Haitian Revolution, where the blacks of Haiti, under Toussaint L'Ouverture and Jean-Jacques Dessalines, overthrew the rule of Napoleon Bonaparte to make Haiti the first free black republic in the Western Hemisphere. Things you don't usually hear in a true school church. So, they came here in 1782. Captain Vesey rented Denmark out to do chores for other slave owners and split the commission with Denmark. So, Denmark was walking down East Bay Street on September 30th, 1799 with money in his pocket. And he came across a barker with a roulette wheel. And the barker said, "Hurry, hurry, hurry, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, step right on, place your bets on the number, step right up. Round and round she goes, where she stops, nobody knows." Denmark placed a bet on number 1884 and won $1,500. So he went back to Captain Vesey. Let's see now, I'm working here in my ledger here. Oh, Denmark, come on in, old boy, what can I do for you? Captain Vesey, I have a question for you. Certainly, what is it? Sir, how much am I worth? How much are you worth? Well, let me look in my ledger. Let's see. Yeah, according to this, you're worth $600. Why do you ask? Biggity, 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 biggity. Okay, I'm worth 600. Here's 8. See ya. Hey, wait a minute, Denmark. Have a nice day. So Captain Vesey took Denmark to court, and the court ruled December 31st, 1799, that Denmark Vesey was thenceforward and forever free. So he became a lay minister 3 blocks from here at the Hempstead AME Church. But then he was secretly gathering his followers to form the Great Slave Rebellion of 1822. But May 16th, 1799, one of his followers, William Paul, went on the corner of Broad and East Bay, and he ran into Peter Prelude, who was owned by Captain John Prelude. He said, "Hey, Peter, what's going on?" "Oh, how you doing, Mr. Paul? I'm all right." "Hey, Peter, come here. Let me holler at you for a second." "Yes, sir. What is it?" "Look here, Peter. You want to get down with what the Denmark Vesey is trying to do?" "Denmark Vesey? Well, who that?" "Shh, not so loud, Peter. Here's our plan. We're gonna..." "Oh, wait a minute now. You gonna do all of that?" "Peter, wait a minute. Feet don't fail me now. Hey, Peter, wait." Peter ran back to his owner, Captain John Prelude. "Mr. Prelude! Mr. Prelude! Mr. Prelude!" "Oh my goodness, Peter, what do you mean by waking me up at this ungodly hour? Do you realize what's the matter? You're shaking like a leaf on a tree." "Mr. Prelude, guess what Mr. Denmark Vesey's gonna do? Guess what he's gonna do?" "He is? Oh my goodness! Heavens to Murgatroyd! This is outrageous, atrocious, and it's pretty bad too. I must call out the militia expeditiously, and right now." So he called out the militia. And Vesey and 34 of his followers were captured on June 16, 1822. And the court ruled that on July 2nd, 1822, Denmark Vesey and his followers would hang by the neck until dead. Peter was fat and happy. The state of South Carolina freed Peter, gave him a financial stipend for the rest of his life, never had to work again. But elsewhere in Charleston was a free and educated black man named Bishop Daniel Alexander Payne, who had a school for free and enslaved children on Tradd Street. And because Denmark Vesey used the Bible, history books, and the Constitution to encourage revolution, the state of South Carolina made it illegal to teach a black person how to read and write, and they shut down his school. But he didn't let that stop him. He went to Xenia, Ohio, where he started Wilberforce College, the first black college in America that was run by black people and started by black people. And one of his graduates was Bishop Richard Harvey King, who came here in 1865 and a few blocks that way, took what was left of the Hempstead AME Church and built a new church on 110 Calhoun Street that he named after the Hebrew word for God is with us, and said to be the mother of the new black churches in Charleston, and that's how Mother Emanuel AME Church came into being. 1901, the great educator Booker T. Washington spoke there. 1904, the great poet Paul Laurence Dunbar spoke there. I was there in 2019 when Senator Cory Booker spoke there. And I was there in January and President Biden spoke there and did a better job than he did at me, but that's another conversation. But in either case, though, but unfortunately, the church is best known for the fact that the terrorist named Dylan Roof came there on 9 years ago, June the 17th, 2015, and assassinated some good friends of mine, including the Reverend Clemente Pinckney and the librarian Cynthia Hurd, and 7 other members of the congregation. Dylan was tried here, and today he is at the federal penitentiary at Terre Haute, Indiana, awaiting his execution. But, as Brenda can tell you, a couple of days after that, 10,000 of us marched on Mother Emanuel to show the world that we were not afraid to go back into that church. And while we were out there marching and clapping and singing our songs and Brenda was filming, the Jewish community of Charleston went into the street and formed a circle and recited the Hebrew prayer of the dead to show solidarity with us. So 3 years after that, the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania met the same fate as Mother Emanuel. So a bunch of us went to the synagogue on Hazel Street for Friday night Shabbat services to return the favor of solidarity and fellowship. And this was also around the time that President Obama came down here. And he made history on that occasion because in the middle of his eulogy for Reverend Pinckney, he went off script and gave his rendition of now that I've been through all that, I'll be happy to take your questions. Any questions from the group? Any questions?
Welcome to Charleston.
I wish. You know how it's been since COVID and all that. I wish. Any other questions?
I know y'all are just, you don't have words to say, right? He's so talented. And this is the kind of talent we have in Charleston. And this is the kind of talent that we need to let everybody in the world know that we're here and we ain't going nowhere. All right? So thank you so much, brother.
Wait, yes, ma'am.
What do you think is like a call to action for like young historians? Because like history has a bad rep of being boring. My mother is around your age, and she used to tell me she hated history, but really she hated their spin on history. Really she hated everything they left out of history. Because history is so rich, it's so juicy, it's so scandalous, it's so beautiful, so all of those things. And so what would you say is like a call to action to young historians in terms of making history like exciting again?
Real
Well-
quick, actually, you mind if I jump in?
Go ahead.
You ever heard of Malcolm X?
Absolutely.
Yeah, of course. That's just a rhetorical question. One of his famous quotes that I really have grasped extensively for the last 30, 40 years is of all of our studies, history is best qualified to reward our research. And the reason why he said that, if you know anything about Malcolm, is because if you study yourself, most importantly, then nobody can take that away from you. So I think, I'm not in Damon's, on his level, but at the same time, you need to understand that, like, going to get what is yours is your birthright. And I think that is really the call to action, is don't let anybody take your birthright from you. There's books, there's lectures, there's videos, however you can learn that is a reputable source, go learn it. But it's your responsibility to make sure that you have it so you can pass it on, because as you see what's going on in this country right now, the powers that be, and there are many, are doing their level best to make sure that it's not possible. So it's the responsibility and the sacred duty to go get it.
Now, to add on to that, a couple of things. Whatever you do to get your history, let me just say this, all right? You're better off in the library than you are on the internet.
Yeah.
There is garbage and nonsense that will mislead you on the internet. Let me give you a brief case in point. A lady called me the other day and has asked me, is it true that black people shouldn't say good morning? And I said, huh? And some of you might have heard this, where they said this nonsense about how they used to beat the Africans, and when they would mourn, they would mock them by saying good morning. I'm like, that's what they told you? Yeah, well, it turned out it was a lady on TikTok saying this stuff, right? And I looked and see, but here's the thing to do with things like that. I looked into that, and the truth of the matter was the phrase good morning is from the Germanic Guten Morgen, okay? But see, you have to do what in order to know that? Read, okay? TikTok and Facebook and social media, those are the worst places you can get your history. But don't get me started on that. But anyway, if you go to places like that, and some of these clowns who I will not name here today in the name of positivity, but he knows who I'm talking about. You know, some of these clowns out there, if you listen to that kind of stuff and entertainers and all that for your history, this is like going to, like Stevie Wonder going to Ray Charles asking him for directions down the street. Don't do it. Go, when in doubt, go to the library. Ask for good, reputable books on the subject. Now, as for not making it boring, well, see, there's only a few of us who are called to do that. There are some of us who, like myself and Sister Carlie, we grew up of that last generation of black elders who like to tell stories. But a lot of them died and took those stories with them. Miss Brenda over here, she can tell you about a great lady whose name should be sainted from her home country by the name of Miss Louise Bennett, who had the Ring Ting Show, who used to entertain them with patois stories and Jamaican history. She's dead, but guess what? Her videos are on YouTube of some of these old, great, respected storytellers. Now, some of these rusty, dusty characters you see on YouTube now and all of that, begging for your money about things that they're never going to put into reality. And folks like that, leave that junk alone, okay? And go to, and you know, look up respectable sources, okay?
May I interject?
Go ahead.
I have been here since June of 2010. I have had the opportunity to, and I broke it down to you before, I'm a Kamya in a Binya environment. Here and I let the camera do the talking. 11 YouTube channels, 30 Facebook pages. The evidence is there, the bear witness statements are there, the documentation of the consistent life practices and customs are there. Whether it's food ways, the hand clapping, the song, you name it, I got it. I done been out there for you. So who was it that had that dissertation to do? Didn't she have on a black jacket or shit? Girl, I got you.
And by the way,
let me tell you something. 13 years behind that DJ.
And incidentally, my YouTube channel is called the American Storyteller. But I'm going to leave one thing to you in the answer to that question, and before I'm going to get to yours in a second, is this. When I was in Dakar, Senegal, and I hope you get to see him when you're there, one of the wisest men I ever met is Dr. Ousmane Sene, who is at the West African Cultural Center, this is what he told me as my assignment. He said that he taught here in America at Wofford College in Spartanburg, and when he left to come back to Africa, the students begged him to stay because he said, you're teaching us things we never knew before. He said, listen, I have given you the tools, so now it's up to you to take the tools and take it from there, and I go back to Africa because you see, a wise man plants a seed and knows he will not live to sit in the shade. And when my mentor in history, Dean Willie Harford, died at the University of South Carolina a few years ago, I said at his funeral the words of Marcus Garvey. When Marcus Garvey was being led into the Atlanta Penitentiary after being on trumped up charge of mail fraud, somebody yelled out to him, I said, congratulations, you caged the tiger, okay? Now, Marcus Garvey went on to inspire Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana to liberate the nation of Ghana from England, right? In Kenya, they would have men go out in the wilderness and read the Marcus Garvey newspaper to the people of the villages and have little boys run through further in the interior to repeat the message of Marcus Garvey. One of those boys was Jomo Kenyatta, who liberated Kenya from the British. Now, what does that prove? Well, when I said that Marcus Garvey was being led to jail, right, and somebody yelled out, I see they've caged the tiger, and he said, they may have caged the tiger, but my cubs are running loose.
Hey!
Oh, praise God.
That's the
Next question.
So first of all, thank you so much for speaking with us today. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
I was going to ask, my question was twofold. The first thing was, of course, you're on YouTube. Are you on any other social media platforms?
Yes, under my real name, Damon L. Fordham. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter X, and Threads.
Okay, so thank you. So the second question is, what made you really incorporate the arts into your presentation? I'm a musician as well.
My dad.
Your daddy?
Mm-hmm.
So tell us more about that. That's interesting.
Okay, I grew up, as I mentioned before, my parents were old enough to be my grandparents. So they were that last generation of black elders who would sit on porches and love to tell stories about their history and all of that. And I'm writing about this. I have a book coming out in January called Black Folk Tales and Chronicles of South Carolina that's going to get into
look
this.
at least every other year, people go out
That's
there
right.
for it.
And so, Black Folk Tales and Chronicles of South Carolina. It'll be out in January the 14th of next year. But anyway, I grew up, people like that would tell history stories in a way that was so fascinating to me, right? And I kind of took it for granted until I went to the library and read a book called Mules and Men by Zora Neale Hurston, where she went to her hometown of Eatonville, Florida, and she wrote down the stories that the elders told her, right? So, allow me to get deep with you for a moment. While I was in West Africa, everybody who I met would look at me and go, Wolof, 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 and I didn't know what a Wolof was, right? And so then in Gambia, I met with one of the griots, right? And the griot, when we were there meeting with him, he took one look at me and did like this. And I said, why is he doing that? And our guide said, follow him. And we went inside this bush where he had an altar. So he insisted that I sit on the side of the altar while he sat down and recited the stories of the Mandinka people. And he looked up at me and smiled and patted me on the knee afterwards. And I asked the interpreter, why is he doing that? He said, he considers you his American counterpart. And I later found out why. While I was there, and those who follow me on social media know the story, we were in the Museum of Dakar, where a young lady named Kaitiba was given the tour. And I kept looking at Kaitiba, and she kept looking at me, and we just felt this weirdness. And so our host was laughing through the whole thing, and he went over her and whispered to her and pointed at me, and she goes, "Mon Dieu, mon frère!" And I said, what is this about? And he goes, "Professor, come meet your Wolof sister." And those who know my Facebook page know this girl could pass for my younger daughter or younger sister or daughter. So we stayed in touch, and then she showed me something really bizarre. She showed me a picture of a griot who looks just like me, wearing traditional African clothes in a black and white picture, and it said on the caption, "The Wolof of the griot tribe of Senegal and Gambia. So I come by the sun sleep.
I know that. I love it. Yes, yes. So wow, y'all. So now, thank you, Professor Fordham. Thank you so much. We have got one more speaker, and then we're gonna have some music. Y'all guys stay with music because the music people are sitting here for almost a half hour. So now we have.
I ain't doing it to him.
Yes, you are. You gonna get that other
This is
side.
not competition. We're all
Right, everything's connected.
Come on, Midway.
we are not